When fear moves in, it often begins quietly, not with screams or panic, but with whispers. A thought, a worry, a slight tightening in your chest that you brush off at first. A glance at the clock at 2:47 a.m. because your brain won't stop circling the same scenario. What if I fail? What if I lose them? What if this never gets better? Fear doesn't usually kick down the door. It slips through the cracks. It sneaks into the places you thought were secure and makes itself at home. And before you realize it, fear is no longer just a visitor. It's a roommate. It shapes your thoughts, controls your decisions, colors your prayers. You used to pray boldly. Now you hesitate. You used to believe confidently. Now you qualify your hope. And if you're anything like the rest of us, you know what it's like to live with that tension, that pull between wanting to trust God and wanting to protect yourself, between wanting to say your will be done and secretly praying as long as it doesn't hurt. You know what it's like to lift your hands in worship on Sunday and then lie awake with anxiety on Monday. You know the inner conflict. You know the script your mind recites at night. You know the fear. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to wonder if it will always be this way. If the knot in your stomach is just part of who you are. If anxiety is your destiny. If peace is for other people. You smile when people ask how you are, but inside you're unraveling. You post the verse, but secretly you wonder if God really hears you. You go through the motions, but your faith feels fragile. But here's what I want you to hear, deep in your bones. Fear may be present, but it is not your future. Anxiety may visit, but it is not your identity. You are not weak for feeling afraid. You are not less spiritual because you battle anxious thoughts. Fear is not a sin, but it is a thief. It wants to steal your peace, your purpose, your trust. But God wants to give you something different. He doesn't shame you for being afraid. He doesn't mock your worry. He meets you in it. In the Bible, every time someone is afraid, God's response is consistent. Do not fear. But he doesn't stop there. He follows it with a reason, for I am with you. That's the difference. That's the game changer. Not that you'll never feel fear, but that fear doesn't get the final say. God does. And his word to you is this: you are not alone. You are not abandoned. You are not defeated. The same God who calmed storms, who shut lions' mouths, who walked through fire, who raised the dead, he is the God who walks into your anxiety and says, "Peace, be still." He doesn't expect you to have it all together. He just wants you to bring him the pieces. Bring him your racing thoughts. Bring him your trembling hands. Bring him the journal full of questions. Bring him the silence that follows your desperate prayers. Because here's the truth. God is not intimidated by your fear. He is not discouraged by your doubt. He is not exhausted by your emotions. He created you. He knows your wiring. He sees the battle behind your smile, and he loves you still. There is a verse in Isaiah that says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you." Isaiah 43, it doesn't say if, it says when. Because storms will come, fear will whisper, anxiety will knock. But when it does, you are not alone. God is with you, not just beside you, but within you. Strengthening, sustaining, steadying your heart. So if you're waking up every day and choosing to believe again, even with shaking hands and a tired heart, you are doing holy work. If you're whispering prayers that feel more like please, God hears you. If you're still showing up, still hoping, still reaching for peace, you are not weak. You are a warrior. And fear? It may visit, but it doesn't get to stay. Because the God who turns graves into gardens, who turns mourning into dancing, is the same God who turns fear into faith. This is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter. One where fear loses its grip. One where faith rises, slowly but surely. One where peace becomes possible. One where trust becomes your default, not your exception. You're not alone on this journey, and your fear is not too much for God. He's already at work. Stay close, learning to breathe again. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it settles in quietly like fog at dawn, unnoticed until it's all you can see. And it's in that quiet that fear does some of its loudest work. It tells you things that sound a little like truth but feel a lot like chains. It tells you that you're not safe, that things will fall apart, that you're not enough, that something bad is going to happen. And it's convincing, not because it's true, but because it knows how to mimic your inner voice. You know the feeling. You try to enjoy the moment, but a shadow lingers. A whisper. What if this doesn't last? What if you lose it all again? You're trying to fall asleep and your heart suddenly starts racing, your mind looping through scenarios that haven't even happened. You're trying to step into something new, but fear paints every door with doubt. And the worst part? It can make you feel like it's your fault, like you should be stronger, braver, better. But let me tell you something you might need to hear again. Fear is not your fault. It's not a character flaw. It's a human reaction to a broken world. Even Jesus felt it. In the garden just before the cross, he said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." That wasn't weakness. That was the raw, real weight of fear pressing in. And yet in the middle of that weight, he prayed. He didn't run. He didn't deny it. He faced it by trusting the Father. That's what faith looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to bow to it. It's not pretending you're fine. It's walking forward even when you're not. It's saying, "I don't feel strong, but I know the one who is." If fear has been your companion lately, I want you to know this. You're not broken. You're not disqualified. You're not too messed up to move forward. You're breathing, and that's proof of grace. Every breath is a declaration that fear hasn't won. Every step you take, even the shaky ones, is an act of faith. Anxiety tries to take your breath, but faith helps you breathe again. And sometimes, that breath is all you need. You don't have to run a marathon today. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to fake a smile. You just need to breathe. In, out. And remember, God is as close as your next inhale. Psalm 34:4 says, "I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears." Notice it doesn't say he delivered me from all my danger. Sometimes the situation doesn't change immediately. But fear? That's something God has authority over. That's something he can untangle from your heart. But it's not always immediate. It's a process, a practice. 100 small choices every day to return to him instead of spiraling, to pause instead of panicking, to breathe instead of breaking. One of the most powerful things you can do in your battle with fear is to tell someone. Speak it out. Say it loud. Darkness thrives in silence, but fear loses power when it's dragged into the light. Maybe for you that's a trusted friend, a pastor, a therapist, or maybe it's just a whispered prayer in your room. God, I'm scared. He can work with that. He honors honesty more than performance. He'd rather have you raw than you're rehearsed. He's not waiting for you to impress him. He's waiting for you to invite him in. Letting God in doesn't always remove the storm, but it always reminds you who's in the boat. He's not pacing the heavens, wringing his hands. He's seated. That's the posture of peace. And he invites you into that posture too. Think of Peter again. When he started to sink, he didn't drown because of the waves. He started to sink because he looked at them. But Jesus didn't scold him. He caught him. That's who Jesus is. He's not mad at your fear. He's near in it. Maybe today your greatest act of faith isn't climbing a mountain, but whispering a prayer. Maybe it's showing up to work even though your anxiety told you to stay in bed. Maybe it's choosing to try again, to believe again, to hope again. Those choices matter. Heaven sees them, and God honors them. You don't have to be fearless to be faithful. You just have to keep breathing, keep walking, keep looking up. Because the one who started the good work in you isn't finished yet. And maybe, just maybe, the very fear that once kept you stuck will become the place God writes a new story. Not a story of defeat, but of deliverance. Not a story of weakness, but of worship. Not a story of panic, but of peace. You're not alone in this, and you're not too far gone. Fear may shout, but it doesn't get the final word. Faith does. Let's keep writing the next chapter together. The breaking point. Fear has a way of making you feel like you're constantly one breath away from breaking. And the truth is, sometimes you are. But breaking doesn't always mean falling apart. Sometimes it means breaking open, breaking free, breaking through. What looks like the end might just be the moment something sacred begins. Because God often allows us to reach the breaking point not to crush us, but to remake us. To strip away what was never meant to stay, and to awaken what we forgot was still alive inside. The breaking point isn't weakness, it's a threshold. A doorway. The place where your strength ends and God's strength begins. The place where faith stops being something you talk about and starts being something you breathe. Where the verses you've memorized are no longer just words. They're lifelines. And when everything else is stripped away, you find out what's been holding you all along. You may feel like you're drowning in responsibilities, fear, expectations, shame, and silence. You may feel like if one more thing hits you, you'll shatter. But I want to tell you something. The shattering isn't the end. In fact, sometimes the crack is how the light gets in. And sometimes the breaking is how the healing begins. Jesus is close to the brokenhearted. That's not just a poetic line, it's a promise. He draws near not to fix you quickly, but to sit with you deeply. He doesn't rush the process. He doesn't shame the unraveling. He joins you in it. Think about the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years, she suffered in silence. Doctors failed her. Society avoided her. But her faith, though weary, drove her to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. And in that moment, just a moment, everything changed. Not just physically, spiritually, emotionally. She had spent everything, but what healed her wasn't money, medicine, or might. It was faith. A trembling, desperate kind of faith. And Jesus didn't just heal her. He called her daughter. Maybe that's you. Maybe you've spent all your emotional currency just trying to hold it together. Maybe you're tired of being strong. Maybe you don't even know what healing would look like anymore. But you're still reaching, still hoping, still whispering prayers in the dark. And that faith, even if it's hanging by a thread, is enough. Faith doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it just reaches. And Jesus meets it every time. When you've reached the breaking point, you begin to see differently. You stop chasing perfection and start pursuing presence. You stop trying to impress God and start trusting Him. You realize that the goal isn't to avoid breaking, but to know where to turn when it happens. One of the hardest things about fear is that it isolates. It makes you feel like you're the only one struggling, the only one sinking, the only one who doesn't have it together. But that's a lie. Everyone has a storm. Everyone has a breaking point. The difference isn't who breaks, it's who rebuilds. And God is a master rebuilder. He takes broken people and writes beautiful stories. He takes fear and rewrites it with faith. He doesn't waste pain. He doesn't overlook tears. He doesn't rush healing. He moves at the pace of love. You don't have to rush through this season. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to keep showing up. Keep reaching. Keep whispering, God help. That's enough. That's faith. And in time, you'll see what He's been doing behind the scenes. The quiet healing, the hidden strength, the slow rebuilding. The way He's been turning your fear into something stronger than it ever was. Into a faith that doesn't waver at every wave, but one that stands. If you're at your breaking point, you're not too far. You're just closer to a breakthrough than you think. Let that be your hope today. Let faith rise, even in the ruins. The invitation to surrender. There comes a point in the journey from fear to faith where you face a crossroads. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet whisper that arrives in the stillness. Sometimes it's a decision that looks like letting go. Other times, it's the last thread you're holding on to snapping and realizing you're still safe, still loved, still held. Because when the fear runs deep and the anxiety is loud, the invitation of God is not to fight harder, but to surrender deeper. Surrender is a word we often misunderstand. It sounds like defeat. It feels like giving up. But in the kingdom of God, surrender is not weakness. It's the gateway to strength. It's not resignation, it's trust. It's not giving in to fear. It's giving over your fear to the one who is greater. Surrender doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop praying. It means you stop carrying what you were never meant to hold. It means acknowledging, God, I can't control this, I can't fix this, but I trust you to hold what I can't. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's not poetic fluff. It's a lifeline. Rest isn't just the absence of work. It's the presence of God. It's the place where your soul exhales, where your shoulders drop, where your mind stops spinning and starts healing. But that kind of rest requires surrender, and surrender requires trust. And trust is built, not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of faith. Faith that says, even if it doesn't look like I thought it would, I believe God is still good. Letting go isn't a one-time act. It's a daily rhythm, a moment-by-moment choice. It's handing over your fears in the morning, and again in the afternoon, and again before you fall asleep. And the next day, you do it again. It's a sacred rhythm that slowly changes your posture, from clenched fists to open hands. It's in those open hands that God begins to pour new things. Peace that doesn't make sense. Hope that rises without evidence. Strength you didn't know you had. Vision for what's ahead. Maybe surrender for you looks like letting go of the what-ifs. Maybe it means releasing the timeline you've built in your head. Maybe it means forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it, or releasing the need to control every outcome. Whatever it is, surrender is the doorway to transformation. Not because your situation will magically change, but because you will. Your heart softens, your mind clears, your spirit steadies, and you begin to see that the things you were trying to hold were never yours to carry alone. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Fear kept them circling. But when they finally stepped into surrender, when they finally trusted God's promise, they entered the land. Surrender wasn't just an emotional experience. It was the difference between wandering and walking into purpose. You have a purpose. Fear wants to delay it. Anxiety wants to distract you from it. But surrender brings you back into alignment with it. It centers you in truth. And the truth is, you are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not failing because you feel fear. You are being formed. God is forming something sacred in your surrender. He's forming peace in place of panic, faith in place of fear, rest in place of striving. And the more you surrender, the more you begin to see that faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the courage to walk forward anyway. You're not surrendering to circumstances. You're surrendering to a Savior. One who calms storms, opens graves, and redeems what feels lost. One who doesn't stand at a distance, but draws near in the middle of your fear. So today, if you feel like the fear is winning, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what am I holding that God is asking me to release? What outcome am I gripping so tightly that I've forgotten to trust the one who holds tomorrow? Lay it down, again and again. Trust is built one surrender at a time. And with each surrender, fear loses ground and faith takes root. You were never meant to carry it alone. Let go, and let God do what only He can. When faith finally speaks louder, there's a moment when it happens. Maybe you don't notice it right away because it's not a trumpet blasting, lightning flashing moment. It doesn't always come with fireworks or tears or a sudden, supernatural breeze sweeping through your room. No, it's quieter than that. But it's powerful. It's the moment when fear stops being your default. The moment your mind begins to reach for truth before it spirals into panic. The moment faith finally starts to speak louder than your fear. You didn't arrive here overnight. And this isn't the end of the journey, but something has shifted. Where fear once dictated your schedule, your relationships, your sleep, your decisions, faith is now taking up space. And not just Sunday morning faith, but Monday through Saturday faith. The kind that walks into doctor's appointments and board meetings and breakups and traffic jams with peace in its chest. The kind that says, even if everything falls apart, I know the one who holds it together. Letting faith speak louder doesn't mean you never hear fear again. It just means fear doesn't get to drive the bus anymore. It might be in the background, still whispering from the back seat, but your hands are on the wheel, and your eyes are fixed on Jesus. Think about the story of David and Goliath. The army of Israel was paralyzed by fear for 40 days, staring at a giant, listening to his taunts. But David stepped in with a different perspective. He didn't pretend the giant wasn't real. He didn't ignore the threat. But he spoke a louder truth. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. That's faith that speaks louder. That's what we're building toward. Faith is not the denial of reality, it's defiance in the face of it. Not because of who you are, but because of who God is. Because of what He's done. Because of what He promises. And you've tasted it now. That moment when you woke up and didn't immediately panic. That conversation where you spoke your truth instead of shrinking. That prayer you whispered even when you weren't sure if it would change anything. These are signs that something holy is growing in you. You're not who you were. You may not be where you want to be yet, but you've taken steps, and God sees everyone. He doesn't just count the miles you walked. He honors the inches too. because inch by inch you're moving forward. Your story isn't over, but this chapter matters. This chapter is where you learn to fight differently, to pray more honestly, to rest more deeply, to believe more fully. This is where you began to trust, not because you had proof, but because you had presence. God's presence. And once you've tasted that, everything changes. When faith speaks louder, you start to live freer. You're not as reactive. You're not as heavy. You start to recognize the enemy's lies faster. You interrupt the spiral with scripture. You stop agreeing with fear and start declaring truth. I am not what I feel. I am who God says I am. I am not abandoned. I am chosen. I am not defeated. I am more than a conqueror. These aren't just affirmations. They are weapons. Truth is your sword, and you've learned how to use it. As you keep walking, it doesn't mean the road will always be smooth. But now you know how to navigate the bumps, how to find peace in the pause, how to hear God in the silence, how to stand when the storm still rages. Because the goal was never perfection, it was presence. The goal wasn't to become fearless, it was to become faith-filled. So now as we close this journey together, I want you to remember this. The God who began this good work in you will be faithful to complete it. He's not finished, he's not in a hurry, and he's not disappointed in your pace. He just loves walking with you. Let that be your confidence. Not your progress, not your feelings, not your performance, but his presence. And when fear tries to speak again, and it will, you'll be ready. You'll listen maybe, but you won't obey. You'll feel it maybe, but you won't bow. Because now you know the truth. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Let that be your anthem. Let that be your legacy. Let faith speak louder. If this series has blessed you, I want to invite you to share it. Someone else is walking through fear right now and needs to know they're not alone. Leave a comment, subscribe, and join us for the next journey. We're just getting started.